Good morning. My name is Nikhila Nandgopal, and today I'm presenting why ethics is a good business decision. Because of a technical difficulty I'm having, I will not be able to share my slides on screen, but I will let you know which slide I'm on so you can follow along with me. So, moving on to slide 2, we have a quick introduction. So, with the rise in consumer awareness through social media and communication technology, we see that consumers have this heightened awareness and actually know what's going on behind the scenes of a company. So, take for example Zara's PR nightmare. Zara in Turkey had a supplier that had stopped paying its employees for about 3 months, and these disgruntled employees went into Zara stores and slipped notes into the pockets of clothes. So Zara's customers ended up purchasing clothes with these notes and found them in the pockets. These were shared on social media and quickly became viral, causing this nightmare. Zara, in the end, had to pay about 3 months in back wages, severance pay, and also created a fund with some of its competitors to prevent this from happening again in the form of a safety net fund in case this actually happens again. So, ethical behavior is a financial decision where Zara would have been financially better off if it had just acted ethically in the first place. Now, this doesn't include the legal fee as well, which heightens the importance of acting ethically. So you'll see at the bottom of the screen, there's a quick roadmap. So we're going to have the introduction, which we just finished. We'll move on to some statistics that came from a survey by the Journal of Consumer Marketing, and then 2 cases, that of Volkswagen and Wells Fargo, and finally a conclusion. I'd like to address the comic at the top right of your screen, and I included this because this seems to be the way most businesses are practicing, where they run decisions by the legal department, but they do not run this by the ethical department to understand the ethical impact of a decision that they're making. So moving on to slide 2. The Journal of Consumer Marketing did a study on about 279 people to understand how ethicality affects consumer decisions. So the goal of the survey was how ethicality affected purchasing decisions, whether ethical behavior was an actual concern for the consumers, and if information would influence how they purchased. So the sample was collected in a northeastern elementary school where students were sent home with 2 surveys to give to their parents, and for each survey that was handed back in, there would be a $2 donation to the PTA fund. There were about 450 surveys sent home, and the ones that were usable, about 279, gave us a 62% return rate. Moving on to slide 4, the results of this survey. So the results are that ethicality is an important consumer concern, and in fact, ethical behavior is expected from a company, and consumers are willing to either punish or reward a company for acting ethically. And this is in the form of prices. So consumers are willing to pay a higher price for an ethically sourced product versus a lower price from an unethical company. So this is simply the perspective of consumers, but really, what happens when a company behaves unethically? This is in the case of Volkswagen and Wells Fargo. So in this case, Volkswagen had a car that, So Volkswagen released about 80,000 cars that had a device that would simulate a more efficient product when it was in test conditions versus road conditions. So in test conditions, the car would have a lower emission rate, would be more efficient, and in road conditions, it actually emitted about 40 times the legal limit of nitrogen dioxide. So, who was affected by this poor decision? Here's the hint. It was all the parties that sued. So, multiple stakeholders sued Wells Fargo for this, and this is shareholders who sued for about $9 billion. There were customers who sued for about $8 billion, and then finally society which is represented by the government, the EPA sued sued Volkswagen for about $14 billion. Now, the quarter that all of these lawsuits occurred was the first quarter that Volkswagen actually had a loss in the past 15 years. Finally, high-level executives at Volkswagen also faced jail time. And this is in addition to any legal fees associated with this lawsuit. Moving on to slide 6, we will discuss Wells Fargo. So Wells Fargo had poor corporate culture, overly ambitious sales goals set by high-level executives, and finally, this led to phantom accounts. So the overall story was that high-level executives set up extremely ambitious sales goals, middle management had to implement on these sales goals, and the sales associates had to figure out how to reach these goals. So middle management was putting excessive pressure on sales associates in the form of firing if sales goals were not met, and then the sales associates actually created phantom accounts and were charging consumers, and they were charging customers based on these phantom accounts. And Wells Fargo was progressively sued by all of its stakeholders. So the shareholders sued Wells Fargo for artificially increased share prices. The employees sued Wells Fargo for malpractice and creating a hostile work environment and wrongful dismissal. Customers sued Wells Fargo and received a settlement for about $142 million. And finally, the CFPB, after an extremely interesting congressional hearing, sued Wells Fargo for $147 million. So this is in addition to all the legal fees Wells Fargo paid, and it significantly hurt their profits. It also led to many high-level executives and the CEO of Wells Fargo having to step down from their positions. Finally, it's important to highlight legal precedent that was set through the result of this lawsuit, where all of us, when we don't read the terms and conditions in any business transaction we make, sign away our right to a lawsuit. So by doing so, we actually lose our ability to file a lawsuit and will be forced into arbitration, which was what was going to happen to many of the Wells Fargo customers. So what actually happened was, because Wells Fargo had acted so unethically, judges actually understood that they needed to protect the rights of individuals and actually allowed a lawsuit to move forward because of the scale of Wells Fargo's malpractice. So moving on to the last slide, slide 7, I'd just like to make a concluding statement. So consumers do care about ethical behavior. They will reward ethical companies and punish unethical ones. This also means that consumers, if they see something wrong with a company, they will take action to correct this wrong. Short-term unethical behavior and poor business judgment does not go unpunished, which alludes to the fact that long-term financial success is associated with ethical behavior. I'd like to point out the comic strip on the right side of the screen, and this actually states that a company will have more money just by acting more ethically because they won't have as many lawsuits. So thank you so much for listening, and act ethical.